Hi, I'm Dr. Marie Hadley, and I'm here to talk to you about introductions again. Alright, so in this video, I'll be reflecting upon the progression of a student's essay through the drafting process. So this particular essay was on the doctrine of economic duress in contract law. And the question essentially asks students whether the doctrine of economic duress should be abolished or not, and to give reasons as to their position. Now, when teaching students how to construct a really solid introduction, I typically tell them they need to do 5 things. The first thing is to provide context to the essay, so have a sentence or two at the outset which sets the scene for the marker and gives that general introductory content or background to the particular topic area. So to provide contextual information. I also tell them they need to make sure that it's really obvious that they're answering the question. So not just writing around the topic, but actually responding to the question that's being put to them. I also tell students they need to be specific. So to clearly outline what it is that they're going to be looking at in the essay, what it is they're going to be arguing, and what it is they're going to be concluding. And I also tell them that a roadmap can be helpful. So it doesn't necessarily have to be as blunt as in section 1, this essay will. In section 2, this essay will. It doesn't necessarily have to be that blunt, but it does need to be super clear what the scope of the paper is from the introduction. And also to make sure their conclusions are at the foreground. So if it's a reform question, state what reform you're putting forward, for example. So essentially, when marking essays, I don't want any surprises in the actual essay itself. I want everything to be clearly laid out in the introduction. This is what I teach my students when it comes to essay writing. These are the key tips that I usually put forward. Now, thinking about these key tips, let's have a read of this draft introduction here. For the first 8 lines of this essay, the student has essentially provided contextual information. So when entering into contractual agreements, public policy has always sought legal protection for a party to have free will when assenting to a contract. Okay, then it goes into some of the elements of this doctrine, and then the rationale or purpose of the doctrine. Okay. I would generally say that that is too much contextual information and that it's lacking a bit of framing, it's lacking a bit of focus. I don't really have a clearer sense of where this essay is going to go after reading this contextual information, although I do have some more, obviously, background information around the actual principles themselves, but that's something that can go in a body paragraph. So here there's a little bit too much contextual information and it's a little bit lacking focus. It's a little bit too general, too broad. Okay, so that would be my kind of key critique of the opening. Then the student gets into the essay, saying that they're going to analyse the doctrine of economic duress and its purpose. That's okay as a general statement. However, the same thing again, I don't necessarily get a clear sense of what's going to be coming in the essay itself, okay? Are we critiquing the doctrine? Are we supporting the doctrine? What is the relevant purpose that will be the focus of the discussion, okay? So same thing, the information is not bad, it's just not as targeted and not as strategic as it could be. Then the student states that they will examine the difference between legitimate and illegitimate pressure to demonstrate how the doctrine is balancing these two things here. So we know that freedom of contractual bargaining and the concept of the person's individual free will or informed consent is going to be relevant to the discussion. However, the student is not being super specific about what arguments they're actually going to be putting forward in relation to these two things. So once again, we have a sense of the essay's scope or some of the themes that will be explored, but we don't have that super clear sense of exactly where the student is going and exactly what they will be arguing. But then their arguments are brought to the fore in the next couple of sentences. So it will become evident that the value of having economic duress means that it shouldn't be removed but improved upon. We now have a direct response to the question, so we're now answering the question, which is good. But once again, we're lacking a little bit of specificity. How are we going to improve it? Okay, we get that information from the next sentence. And then in the final sentence, the student states they're going to reject the proposal of removing common law duress. So that sentence is a little bit repetitive of the sentence 2 sentences above. And the sentence 2 sentences above is lacking a little bit of specificity around what it is that the student is actually arguing in terms of improvements. So if we think back to those 5 tips, there's a little bit too much contextual information, lacking specificity at times. The response to the question is coming a little bit late in the paragraph, or the framing, the positioning in response to the question is coming a little bit too late. There's a clear conclusion. However, the roadmap is a little bit unclear as well, exactly what the student will be looking at in each section and what they're arguing in that section. So we have a solid introduction, but the student could definitely improve on it, could definitely essentially tighten everything up and give that clear sense of the essay in probably half as many words. So this was their first draft. Then, after a class where we unpacked this introduction and we talked about those 5 key tips that I mentioned, the student then redrafted their essay, and we'll take a look at what they did for the second draft. All right, straight away you should see that we have probably half to 1/3 as many words. I don't know if that maths works out right. We have less words than the previous draft, which is good because this had a very short word limit, this particular assignment, only 1,000 words, so 1,100 with the plus 10%. So the student has cut down the amount of words. Now let's see if they've targeted their contextual information more strategically this time around. So the doctrine of economic duress essentially balances the competing objectives of liberty to contract and bargain within a free market economy. Okay, so they're setting the scene with this tension, much more strategic. That information is not as general, it's not as broad, and it's setting up the fact that this tension is significant for the argument to come. So that was a much better opening in my opinion. They've then linked to the question. So that question is then at the foreground of their response. And they're giving a sense of their key arguments there. So already in those first couple of sentences, we have a more targeted contextual or background information. We have a clearer sense that they're answering the question, and we have them flagging their position that is to come. We have them flagging the stakes of what will occur if their argument doesn't get up. All right, then we have the student providing that roadmap, what they will look at. Then we have them providing a sense of their argument in the next section. And we have the sense that they're focusing on the balance between these things. And then we have them linking in their third section their analysis of the doctrine to their position. We have their final statements as well here, where they're once again stating their position and clearly responding to the question. So essentially what we have in this second introduction is a much tighter response to the question. Okay, so they're more specific, their roadmap is clearer and linked to their arguments. We have a clear statement of the conclusion. What else do we need? We need our contextual information is there and strategically selected. We also have a much clearer response to the question throughout the introduction. So in my opinion, the student has lifted their potential mark range. Just if you were going off the introduction, they've listed their potential mark range into that higher distinction, perhaps even higher distinction kind of category. So I would say after reading this one, we've probably got an essay that'll sit around 80, 81, 82, 83% just from reading the introduction. Okay, and in the previous draft, I would have said that their paper is probably sitting around 75. All right, so keep in mind those key tips when redrafting your introduction. And also, I 100% think it is worthwhile to always redraft your introduction after having written through your paper before handing it in, because your clarity and your sense of how your argument all fits together across the course of your essay is always better at the end of the writing process and at the beginning. So it's worthwhile paying attention to the structure and progression of your introduction. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will see you next time for more introduction, commentary, and feedback. Thank you.